Karen, for those kind words inviting me, and thanks, Stephen, for asking me to share my story of recovery, and everybody who does service. I am an alcoholic, and my name is Carol, and I am not anonymous. And I do say my last name except when we're being recorded, because I never know where it's going to show up, but I'm not anonymous to each other. I was given the gift of sobriety in Fort Worth, Texas on May 1st, 1988 at the Glass House Group. And a day at a time, I haven't had a drink in 13,351 days, a day at a time. I will tell you, especially early on, sometimes it was a breath at a time or a minute at a time. And that's 36 years, 6 months, and 18 days without a drink. Never thought it was possible. You know, when I didn't go to treatment. I just came to Alcoholics Anonymous. But before I got here, I quit a lot of times. I said, I can go 2 weeks without a drink. I don't have a problem. I didn't go to jail, and I didn't get a DUI, and I didn't go to jail, and I didn't have all those consequences. I had a boyfriend who drank like I did, and I drank like he did, and he had the problem because he showed up in a blackout, and I had many of those. But I came in, you know, this higher power that I know loves me tricked me into AA, right? He had the problem. So I talked to somebody I worked with I knew was in Al-Anon and AA, and she told me to go to the Glass House Group and go to an Al-Anon meeting. And so I showed up at the Glass House Group, and guess what? My first few meetings were open AA meetings. And when they had an open AA meeting, they didn't have an Al-Anon meeting. And I sat in the back of that room, and the alcoholic told their story. And I said, I did that. And that happened to me. And I felt like that too. And you know what? I think I said it out loud because somebody said, maybe you need to go take a desire tip. And so after going to a few meetings, because the first 3 meetings were open AA meetings, and I heard the alcoholic share. And every meeting they said, does anybody have a desire to stop drinking and try this way of life for 24 hours? And I did. And I went up and took that long walk to the front of the room, and I got what they call a desire chip. It's a little aluminum coin. And the person that gave it to me said, Carol, if you want a drink, put it under your tongue, and if it melts, you can have one, and if it doesn't, you can't. And I'll tell you what, mine never melted, and I sure tried. But what I did is I was willing to change. And right away, somebody greeted me at my first meeting at the door when I walked in, and they gave me a hug, and they welcomed me. And then they told me to go make coffee. I said, I don't drink coffee. I don't know how to make coffee. And they said, on the wall by the coffee pot are instructions. And if I follow the instructions, I can make coffee. And I did. And then they told me to go set up chairs because we had to rearrange chairs for every meeting. And I did that. And then they told me to look for people more scared than me and greet them. You know, shake hands with the men and hug the women. And I did that. And they told me, if I do all those things, they asked me that I'll get a day of sobriety for each one of those things. And I think that's how I got my first year, you know. But when I told you I had 2 weeks without a drink and it was really hard, I now have 1,907 weeks. And at 2 weeks without a drink, I wanted a drink. See, when I came to you, I felt the shame and the guilt and the remorse and felt dirty inside because of stuff that happened when I drank and stuff that happened before that when I was a little kid. And, you know, I had blackouts and did embarrassing things. And I'm one of those that I drank for the effect, and I changed what I drank. When, you know, if I got thrown up sick on something, I changed to something else, right? And I did all those things that they said in the book. And I got a big book of Alcoholics Anonymous at my first meeting. And they said to go home and read the book. And because I like to overdo stuff, I went home and I read that whole book. I think it took like 2 days. I read, because I'm a fast reader. I might not remember what I read, but I can read a lot. And I read that book, and I found me in the book. The guy who put the whiskey in the milk. That was me, right? Because I'll tell you what, it wasn't my last drink, but it was my last drunk. And I had alcohol poisoning, and I didn't know it till I came to you. My last drunk was at Billy Bob's honky tonk in the Fort Worth Stockyards. That guy I was with was a police officer. He was a detective. And Billy Bob's had a police fire appreciation night, and it was all the free alcohol anybody could drink. And I was about 99 pounds and about 5'1". And I remember drinking about 6 drinks of J&B Scotch straight. And the next day I was really sick. And I thought it was the spicy chicken wings because that's the only food they had was spicy chicken wings. So it had to be that got me sick. And until I came to you, I didn't realize how sick I was, right? And how the alcohol was what made me really sick. It was the only time I remember having to leave work early because I always showed up to work. And the more I read that book, the more I identified. I did a lot of controlled drinking, and I missed the mark a lot. I overshot it, and I had blackouts, and I drove drunk, and I did all those things. And I was talking to somebody that's not one of us not too long ago, because I think his wife's one of us. And he talked about how at night they'd watch TV, and they'd talk about a TV show, and the next night he said, let's watch TV. And she said, let's watch this. And he goes, we watched it last night. We talked about it. She said, no, we didn't. And I tried explaining a blackout, and he had no concept of even thinking that was possible. Right? But I know I did, because I remembered not doing stuff and waking up where I don't remember how I got there or what happened during that. So what happened to me is I came to Alcoholics Anonymous and I wasn't drinking for 2 weeks. You told me just come and don't drink. Well, what happened to me is life got emotionally painful and I wanted to go drink, and I was at a meeting, and before that meeting I had dinner with one of the girls who came in about when I did. And we were talking about stuff that happened to us as a child, and we were talking about stuff that happened to us when we were drinking. And so sitting in that meeting, all that stuff hit me, and I just couldn't take it. And I was walking down the hall to go out the front door, and a guy named John stopped me when I walked by the kitchen where the coffee pot was. He said, where are you going? I said, I'm going to go drink because I don't like feeling this way. He said, Carol, don't go back out because you might not make it back. And if you go out, you might drive drunk and kill somebody yourself, or you don't know what's going to happen. So just go back in that meeting and talk to the women. And I did. And we sat and we talked and we cried. And, when I would sit in those meetings and I would look at the steps, and then they had the promises on the wall, and I would look at the one that said, I won't regret the past and wish to shut the door on it. And I wanted that one really badly. And that's what the women did. We talked about those things. I kind of did a 5th step on some stuff at 2 weeks without a drink. I didn't even know I was doing a 5th step, but that's what I kind of did. And they told me what happened to them. And then they showed me in the Alcoholics Anonymous book that says something to the effect that cling to the thought that in God's hands, those deepest, darkest secrets of my past are my greatest possession to avert death and misery for others. And after that, I didn't have the craving to drink anymore. If it showed up, it wasn't very strong. So that 5th step promise that I didn't even know about, that said the thought to drink won't come often, happened for me. And I got a sponsor. I was at a meeting, and they said, there's a lady who needs a meeting to her house. And I go, here's this higher power that I didn't even believe in yet, that I thought was punishing and hateful because I always made promises and broke them and stuff had happened, right? So that's the kind of higher power I came to you. I couldn't pick up a card if it said the word God on it when I got here. But I was at this meeting where they announced a woman needed a meeting. She was homebound. She was a smoker, and she had emphysema, and she was 22 years sober, and she had a third of a lung on oxygen and couldn't get out of bed. Excuse me. So I got her number, and I called her, and I went and visited her, and she had this calmness and this stillness and this serenity, and my spirit just loved her, and so she became my first sponsor. And Lois died at a year sober, and she had almost 23 years sober. And if God had said, Carol, I'll put this amazing woman in your life, but she's going to die in about 11 months, I probably would have said, no, thank you. But thankfully, we didn't know that, because the foundation of my recovery is what Lois taught me. And she got me into the book and the steps immediately. I told you I read that book, and when I read the book, the words bounced off it, because I tried to read it for somebody else. But when I told somebody that about the 3rd or 4th day sober, they said, read the book for me. And that's what I did. And I identified. And, the first time I read the book, and I read it quickly. And the second time I read the book, they said, use a highlighter. And I read it more slowly, and I highlighted things in yellow, things I identified with, or things I read that I hoped they would come true for me at some point. And the third time I read it, I highlighted in pink. And if you paint pink over yellow, you get orange. And you know what? My book was very colorful. And it started falling apart. And they told me if my book falls apart, I'm not going to. And they called things 5 alive. That little medallion they gave me on the back, it had numbers 1 through 5. First one was pray in the morning. It said read our literature. It said get a sponsor, make phone calls, pray at night. I had to do at least 5 things. And Lois told me to go to meetings and look for women more scared than me and get their phone number and call them. I had to call 3 to 5 women every day. She had me read the 3rd step. I said, I don't believe in this higher power. It's punishing me. It hates me. And she said, you could have any higher power you want. And it says in the big book we saw where it says God's either everything or nothing. What do I want that God to be? So I want that God to be everything. You know, I'm kind of the all or nothing kind of gal, right? If I want a box of crayons, I don't want 8 crayons. I want the one with like 164 colors. I want it all. Just like I want the whole program of Alcoholics Anonymous. They told me I have to have the steps, traditions, and concepts. It's a 3-legged stool. If I only have one, I'm going to fall off. I need to be in the middle, and I love our online meetings. You know, I learn history. I go to big book studies, and I go to history meetings, and my video is on, and Karen said, we see each other at other meetings, and we get to know each other and get to be friends. And I have an old camper van, and in June I left in for 3 months. I traveled in it, and I met online friends and went to meetings with them. It's so cool, you know, and we've had online meetings since 1986. We didn't have pictures and sound. We had lines of text. So those got me into the steps right away. I had to find this higher power, and I just asked it to please show me how you're there. Let me know that you're working in my life. And then I was told, just watch for how God's doing that. Now, one of my favorite promises in our Alcoholics Anonymous book is on the top of page 100. And it says something to the effect, both me and a new man, which I interpret as maybe somebody I just have met, maybe it's not new to the program, but me and the new man must walk day by day in the path of spiritual progress. If I persist, remarkable things will happen. It says, when I look back, I will find that the things that came to me when I put myself in God's hands are far more wonderful than I could have imagined. So follow the dictates of a higher power, and I'll live in a new and wonderful world no matter what my present circumstance. So that means I work day by day and I stay in the now. I don't get into the what ifs. You know, Lois always, she taught me how to be a kid. See, I grew up very young. At the age of 10, I had a lot of responsibility. I was the oldest of 3 kids. I had to take care of brother, sister, cook meals, take care of the house, so all this stuff. I didn't go to college. I went to work in New York City 3 months before my 18th birthday full time. And I think having all that responsibility kept me from doing a lot of stuff I might not have done if I went to college and did all that stuff. And so she taught me how to be a kid because I was always very serious. I didn't laugh and smile. So she gave me little stuff to do, like go buy bubbles and blow bubbles. And I go, this is silly. And she said, just go buy it, take the action. And so I did, and I'm blowing bubbles trying to get this over with. And I go to another meeting, and somebody shared their sponsor, told them to go blow bubbles, and she's talking about watching them float in the sunshine with rainbows. I'm going, so I had to go buy more bubbles and try it. And, you know, now I put things in bubbles, so when they break, God has it. And I know this God loves me. The day I got my 30-day chip, you know what? Somebody asked me to read how it works, and I said no, because I would be self-conscious and make a mistake, and then I'd be embarrassed. And you know what happened that day? Instead of being proud of having 30 days sober, I sat in that meeting, and I did not hear anything anybody said. I learned that day that the guilt is worse than the fear. Because what came to my mind, I knew it had to be this higher power, and it's one of those looking back things. Because what came to my mind is if everybody said no, there would not have been a meeting for me to be sitting in right then. Because the glass house had a really big sign when you walk in the front door with the responsibility statement that says, I am responsible. When anyone anywhere reaches out for help, I want the hand of AA always to be there, and for that I'm responsible. And I made a decision that day to not say no to an AA request. And so Lois had me read the book, and we did that. And right away, because I said my only prayer I knew was, God, get me out of this, right? And she said the big book has lots of prayers. And if I called her with something, she'd do one of two things. First, she'd laugh, and then she would say, what are you grateful for today, Carol? And another time I'd call her, and she goes, pray about it for 3 days. I go, 3 days? She said, yeah, it's not anything you need to take immediate action on, right? So I started praying, and all I could pray for is God's will. And all I could pray is the prayers from the big book that she told me to pray, that she showed me where they are. And I was doing that. And then a week or so later, she'd ask whatever happened with whatever it was, and I totally forgot about it. It just worked itself out somehow without me messing with it. And so what she had me do is every morning, she said, as soon as I wake up and before I go to bed at night, and fit it in during the day. And we didn't have all this technology. When I got sober, we didn't even have the daily reflections yet, right? We had phone books, and that's why our home group last night, my friend Debbie said, our group was on Tradition 11, and we talked about being anonymous. And we're not anonymous to each other, because I need to know who you are, so if I need help or you need help, we can find each other. And we had phone books. Some of us remember the phone books with names and phone numbers in them, right? You can't find Carol L in a phone book. I wasn't anonymous, is what I was taught. I wasn't anonymous when I was drinking. Right? And so she said I had to do a 3rd step prayer and a 7th-step prayer, and I had to read step 10 and 11. And then she didn't care if I believed it or not. She told me to read it. And I had somebody else told me to put a note, and I still have this note. It's a different piece of paper, but the words are the same. And my note says, Dear Carol, I know what I'm doing. Love God. And that's all I need to know. It's on my refrigerator right now. And so I had to do these things. And so my 3rd steps, for a while, I read it out of the big book the way it was. And the 7th step, I read it out of the big book the way it is. And then one day I quit doing that, because you know what I learned? The 3rd step is pretty much the same, but I asked God to direct me to how God wants me to be of service that day and to be aware. And like when I share my story, it doesn't ever come out the same because I don't plan it. I just share what God puts in my mind. And the 7th step, I took out the words good or bad. See, there's words I took out of my vocabulary. Good, bad, right, wrong, always, never, and should. And hate, because I used to hate everybody and everything, and I had to take that out too. There's somebody, when I was new, said, a loving God expresses itself through me, and are my words, actions, and deeds reflecting a loving higher power? So I had to do that. And so I just say, God, take all of me and give me back what you want me to have today. That's my 7th-step prayer. And the 10th step, as I go through the day, I have to watch for selfishness, dishonesty, resentment, and fear, right? It tells me what to do when that happens. I don't get into those a lot, but I get into undecided, frustrated, and overwhelmed kind of often. And I ask God to remove those. And then step 11, it says, upon awakening, I think about the 24 hours ahead. And if that's too much, especially when I was new, it could be 5 minutes or half a day or a couple hours or whatever I need it to be, that I can go through that without thinking about drinking. And then what happened is I go through a day and I didn't think about drinking for a whole day, right? And then it got to be longer. And Lois would give me prayers to use. Like one of the prayers was, God, if it be your will, can I please not do things to hurt myself anymore? And then she told me another one was, God, if it be your will, can I please see people in situations as you do? And she told me I had to take care of myself for God, because if I don't, I can't do what God wants me to do. And then she's, and one time I said, somebody was saying something about me, and she goes, Carol, would you let somebody dump a bucket of garbage in the middle of your living room? I said, well, no. She goes, why would you let them dump it in your mind? She said, go to the mirror and say, this is what they said. Is it true or not? If it's not true, let it go. And if it is true, do I like that about me or do I want to change it? And so I had all these options, right? And then she had me, besides doing the reading I told you 3 times a day, I had to write a gratitude list. and I had to write a list of things I did to help my self-esteem that day, call 3 to 5 women and write a journal. And so I went to work, and I went to a meeting before work, and then I worked all day, and then I went to a meeting after work, sometimes 2. And sometimes I'd call her and she'd say, "What are you going to do?" I said, "I'll go to a meeting." And she'd say, "Come over here and we'll have our own meeting." And I'd sit on her bed for hours and we'd have our own meeting. And so I did all those things, and time added up, you know. The year sober, and I didn't drink through it. And I really missed her, you know. Even 2 days after surgery, when I got out of the hospital, I had my friend take me in a wheelchair to go see Lois at the hospital. And I missed her, but she gave me this foundation. And, you know, I call her and go, Lois, there's no knot in my gut. There's no chaos in my life. There's no crisis happening. And she'd say, "Do you know what that is?" I said, "No." She goes, "It's called serenity." I went, "Oh, didn't know what that was." She also had me read the Little Red Book, because she said when she got sober, they had the big book, the 12 and 12, and the Little Red Book. So we did a lot of my early recovery through the Little Red Book. And it talked about in there off the beam and on the beam, and it talked a lot about contented sobriety. And I like to stay in contented sobriety. And that's pretty much how I live my life. And how do I do that? I live the steps and the traditions and most of the concepts when I can remember all of them. The one I remember the most is concept 5, and it says the minority voice is as important as the majority voice. Because I used to have this little plaque at home, and it said it was better to remain silent and be thought a fool than to speak up and remove all doubt. And I don't live that way anymore. And I'm grateful to have this way to live, that I am at peace in my own skin, because I never was like that. And I could look you in the eye, and I don't do real embarrassing things very often anymore, but every now and then I do. And I don't do this near perfect in any way, shape, and form. And I told you I had to find this higher power, and I would talk to people about theirs and listen to them. And some people said God's their best friend, and other people said God's their father. And you know what? And they'd get on their knees to pray. I tried that one time. I don't get on my knees to pray. I've learned God hears me even if I think something and don't say it. God doesn't care where I'm praying. This higher power that I can call God now doesn't care. And mine is gender neutral. Mine's not a parent, because my parents, I loved them, and I know they loved me, and they did the best they could, but they were harsh sometimes, and they lied to me sometimes, and from starting when I was a little girl. And you know what? I couldn't have that image. And I know my best friends were not always there for each other, because we all have lives. So I didn't want a higher power that wouldn't be there for me. And so mine is just a gender neutral spirit that has lots of attributes. And I remember being new, and I'd rely on the attribute of strength or determination or courage or whatever I needed. And sometimes I wrap God around me like a blanket, you know. I've had a lot of surgery, sober and before sober. And I've had a lot of complications from it, and I deal with chronic pain on a daily basis. And today was one of the worst pain days I've had in a long time. It was really hard. And you know what? I just wrap God around me like a blanket. Or sometimes when I have to face something, I use God like a plexiglass shield. Remember those old phone booths with 4 sides, and we had to put coins in the phone? Sometimes I'm in one of those phone booths, and nothing can hit me or attack me, because it has to go through God to get through me. I heard somebody once, they said they put their hand in God's and nothing comes to them that hasn't first passed through God's gentle, loving hands. And sometimes I had this big piece of paper, and I drew a handprint on it. And that's God's hand. And things I want to give God, or people that I'm praying for, I write their name on that hand. And the reason I do that, and I usually don't talk about non-conference approved literature, but God put this thought in my head, so I'm going to share it. There's a book by Og Mandino called Mission Success. And this woman in the UK had a boarding house during the war, and all the soldiers that passed through her boarding house, she had this big hand drawn on the wall in her hallway. And every soldier that put their name on that hand survived the war. And so I thought, why not? I could do that. So I drew a big hand and I put the names in there of people and I give them to God. See, I used to think I knew what was best for people, but I don't. And the traditions, they taught me how the traditions apply to my relationship with other people. And so I have to do that, and especially tradition 10. My book of Alcoholics Anonymous says there's 2 sins. One's to interfere with my own growth, and one's to interfere with the growth of another. I used to think I knew what was best for everybody, and my best thinking got me here. And so what I found for me is I don't invite God into my small, limited human day anymore. I invite myself into God's day. Anything's possible in God's day, right? And I don't read my book in the singular. I don't read my book silently anymore because my mind wanders and then I don't remember what I read. So I read out loud. And the reason I did that is one time when I was really new, I was at a meeting and whoever was chairing the meeting read after the ABCs and how it works. And she read it out loud in the singular as I am the actor and I want to set the stage in the play. And the impact it had on me was really profound. And so after that, I read my big book out loud in the singular. I turn things into statements or questions. And do I understand that? Do I believe that? Do I want that to come true? Right? And there's lines in the, and when I got sober, we had cassette tapes and the group Glass House recorded on Thursday. We had a step study where one person went through their story 3 steps a week. And on Friday and Saturday night, we had speakers. And so they taped them. And then we had a great guy, he's passed on. His name was David A. from Dallas. And he would come and he'd do the steps, the traditions, and the concepts. And they recorded that, and there'd be conferences. And I wasn't spending money on alcohol, so I was spending money buying the big book, the 12 and 12, right? Any of the recordings, and I had thousands of cassette tapes. And so I had to keep my mind busy to not think about drinking, right, when I was new. And I didn't know how to even cook sober. And so if I was cooking, if I was getting ready for work, if I was driving an hour drive each way to work, I was listening to a cassette tape of something. They told me to put as much effort into my recovery as I did into my drinking. And I don't know about you, but drinking was a lot of, make sure I have enough, right? Don't go to the same liquor store all the time. Don't watch how much you buy at each place. A lot of stuff, right? When you're out drinking, it was a lot of work too. Make sure my shirt was tucked in when I came from the ladies' room and don't walk into the walls and the chairs. And just a lot of effort. So I did that 3rd step with Lois, and then she said, let's do the 4th step. She didn't care if I was ready or not. I didn't want to do it. And she said it was her favorite step. She said, if you don't know why you're the way you are, Carol, how can you be different? It was to find out why I wasn't good or bad. She said, I'm not a bad person trying to get good. I'm a sick person trying to get well. So I did the 4th step, and then I did the 5th step. I already did the hardest part of my 5th step at 2 weeks. So it was really not so hard to do it with her. And she had me get the hardest stuff out first. And then I got my 5th step done, and it was like I had this empty spot. I had no more secrets. And then I used this prayer that was, God, please, I have an empty spot, fill it like you want it filled. And God always filled it with women in service. And so that's what I got immersed in. I even was a GSR. I think you had to wait 2 years, and then I was a GSR. And Lois, when I was new, the other thing Lois said is write to GSO and say you want to be of service. So I did. I followed directions really well most of the time. Sometimes I'd have to pray about it for 3 days when she gave me a direction I didn't want to do, but I'd do it because I got to the point, my way didn't work. Am I going to walk into this wall, or am I going to just listen to somebody's experience? So I wrote to GSO, and they wrote back, and they said, here's some women in prison you can write to. And they gave me something which changed my life drastically. And it's called Loners International, and it's a meeting by mail, and this is what it looks like. And I'm still doing it 36 and a half years later. And the last issue I write to them a few times a year, and this one they put in, and it's almost 2 pages long, because I wrote how much this program means to me and my interaction with all of you online now. And you know what? I didn't know how to look at people and talk to people, because when I got to you, my life was going to work, coming home, and drinking. And so by writing to these people, we had mutual friends around the world, and they wrote very descriptive, and I learned how to express myself in letters. And I had file crates of letters from people all over the world. And at first I said, you know, Lois, I'm writing to people all over the world, and they're not all writing back, just like I'm making all these phone calls, and they're not all calling back. And she said, when you need a phone call, they'll call you. And what, Carol, what is your motive for doing this? And I said, it's to carry the message and stay sober. She said, if you get a letter back, it's a gift. And the first time somebody called me was when my dog had puppies, and I was holding a stillborn puppy, and 6 o'clock in the morning, and my phone rang. And somebody called me. They knew. I don't know how they knew, but God had them call. And so, you know, I had trouble asking for help, because I thought asking you for help was a sign of weakness. And God, you know, Lois said, Carol, what does it feel like to do for other people? And I said, it feels really good. I like it. She told me if I don't let other people help me, I'm depriving them of that feeling. Because maybe you're praying, they're praying, how can I be of service? And me asking for help is answering their prayers. So it made it a little easier. It's still really hard for me to ask for help, but it's beneficial. I love doing it now to help people, and it's getting easier. So I did my 5th step, and you know, there's a line in the big book that I really liked, and it says, if I could, you know, after my 5th step, to sit an hour, and it says, if I did this to my satisfaction, it wasn't to anybody else. I didn't have to please my mom or Lois. It's between me and God. And I had to do step 6 and 7, and those were my survival tools, the way I lived. And I had to come to you and give them up. And when somebody told me, and you can do this, they said, clasp my hands. So I did. And they said, Carol, what thumb's in the front? And I said, my right one. They said, switch it so your left thumb's in the front. And they asked me how it felt. And I said, it feels weird and uncomfortable, and I don't like it. And they told me every day, clasp my hands, and every time my right thumb is in the front, switch it so my left thumb is in the front. And that one day when I clasp my hands, my left thumb's going to be in the front, and it's going to be automatic, and it's going to be comfortable. And they told me that's what New Actions and Behaviors in Alcoholics Anonymous is. At first, it's going to feel weird, uncomfortable, and I'm not going to like it all the time. But the more I do it, the more comfortable it became and more automatic it became. And now if I revert into old behavior, which I try not to do, because I try to catch it in step 10, you know what? It's comfortable. All the stuff I do now is the same stuff I did when I was new. And they told me every time I go through something I haven't been through before, I'm a newcomer. And I've had a lot of yets sober that I didn't have before I got sober. No, I haven't gone to jail or lost a job or any of that. But I lost a husband, I lost a dad. Then when Mom died, I already had that experience, had a brother pass away, had surgery. I've had 3 sponsors die with long-term sobriety, you know, and I've been to 5 international conventions. And the reason I know God hears my thoughts, there's so many of them, but one of the strong ones is there's a couple. I was just a couple months sober, listening to David's cassette tape, and I didn't know who he was at the time. But I went to my Sunday meeting, and it's a speaker meeting. And I said, well, I've been listening to this cassette tape of David A. from Dallas, and if he ever shows up in Fort Worth, I want to hear him. And they pointed and said he was our speaker that morning. And he became a really good friend. And another one is I was driving home, and I was about a little over a year sober, I think about 14 months or so. And I said, I was driving home. I remember the intersection I was at in Fort Worth. And I said, God, I need to be more active. I've not been doing a lot right now, you know, speaking or reaching out, and I need to be more active. And I get home, and on my answering machine, which we had back then, this is John from GSO in New York, and we know you're going to the International in Seattle, and we want you to share at the Loners International meeting at the convention. I go, God, I don't think that big. I think local, right? And I got to share at that meeting, and there were thousands of people there, and I thought I was supposed to go last, and they put me first, and I thought I shared what felt like 20 minutes or more, and I stopped, and it was only 10 minutes, and then I beat myself up for not sharing the whole time. Whereas when I got to you, I couldn't even stand in front of the room and say my name. I had to drink to talk for work things. And I've changed so much. And so I did that. And then I did amends. I had to make my amends. So I did amends. I did some by writing, and I did some in person, and some just by being different. And Lois said, I make amends by just being different to some people who I don't know who they are or how I can find them. God's sense of humor is, I lived in Texas. My parents were in New Jersey, and I broke up with that boyfriend. And I wrote my parents and the boyfriend amend letters and mailed them. And I thought, I hope I put the right letter in the right envelope. And I was praying, and guess what? I wrote the wrong post office box for the boyfriend, and the letter came back, and I got to see I put the right letter in the right envelope. So God gave me peace of mind. And, I continue to do steps 10, 11, 12. I live the steps. I was 4 years sober. I got cancer again. I had to have major surgery. And my doctor gave me a 99-1 odds they could do reversible surgery. I had colorectal cancer. And I had it when I was 21. It came back. And so I shared at a meeting. I was scared, and I had to have surgery. And I'm laying on the stretcher outside the operating room. And the anesthesiologists were talking. And I said, "You sound really familiar." And he took his cap and his mask off, and he leaned down and he said, "Glass house." And I said, "Can we invite God into the operating room?" And he said, "Yeah." So we're holding hands and we're saying the Serenity Prayer, and some other doctor walks by. He goes, "Do you two know each other?" And Jim said, "Yes, we're both sober members of Alcoholics Anonymous." Right? And I woke up, it was an over 6-hour surgery, and I woke up a couple hours later in recovery, and Jim was standing by my bedside. My mom said through the whole surgery, he went out, or he sent somebody out to give my family updates. Alcoholics Anonymous. There's so much more to that story, and it's still unfolding. But I want to tell you, God gave me the 1%, and I have a permanent ileostomy since 1992 with the bag on the outside of my body. And I get to share it. And, if God said, "Carol, I'll put you back the way you were," but I lose all the lessons and experiences that I've had because of this. And not only do I lose it, but so does everybody else that's been helped or got inspired by it. I tell God no. Because I've gotten so much strength through this. There's so much, I wish I could tell you the whole story, but you know what? I know that I have a loving God, and I say, "Okay, God, however this goes, I get a lesson and experience to grow through to share with somebody else," because that's what it's about for me now. And I got somebody was chatting with yesterday. They had something happen in their house that they caused by accident by leaving the stove on, and it caused some complications at home. And you know what? I'm going to tell you the story because normally it would be embarrassing, but it's one of those when I look back, I can laugh sort of thing, right? In June, it was really hot, and I drove somewhere, and I put my car window down just a little bit. I put the window down, and when I put it up, I thought I put it all the way up, but I left it not even a half inch open. And then it just happened to be when we had 3 days of torrential hurricane force rain. So after the rain stopped, after the 3rd day, on the 4th day, I got in my car, and I'm like, "Why is it wet in here?" And then I realized the window wasn't all the way up. And my car, I had a 2000 Toyota with 128,000 miles that I loved and had repainted. It was in great shape. And guess what? It didn't work. I drove somewhere and it stopped. I got it to the mechanic. They couldn't fix it. They're going to total my car. And I was leaving on my trip. It was the end of June. I was ready to leave on my trip, and I went anyway. And I said, "You know what? When I get back, I'll deal with the car." And the whole time I was gone, and somebody had the same car where I was for 2 months, and I didn't think about it. I just gave it to God. Before, you guys, I would have worried the whole time and tried to fix it and plan it out. And then I got home and I started looking for a car. And I thought, "Oh, it's going to cost a lot. And, oh, my insurance is going to go up and all this other stuff." And guess what? I got the right car. And it's interesting. I'll tell you what, I kept looking at this car dealers. And one day I walked by this car and I said, "This is a really nice car, but it's way more than I want to spend." And I kept looking at other cars. And one day the salesperson called and said, "I've got this car and it's the one you need." And it was a 2022 car. And he told me the price, and it only had 17,000 miles. And I drove it and I liked it, and I ended up buying it. And I have a service plan for 6 years if anything happens. My car insurance is less money. It's got all these cool features that I didn't know about, like, and see, I didn't get into the what ifs. And then about 2 or 3 days after I bought it, and I was looking at the car, that was the car I saw in the parking lot that I liked. And I didn't even know it. And then it reminded me of a story I heard when I was new. They used to tell a lot of stories at the glass house. One of them was there's this little boy and he's flying a kite, and he's walking on the beach flying this kite. And a man comes over and he says, little boy, what are you doing? He said, I'm flying my kite. He goes, but how do you know your kite's there? You can't see it. It's up in the clouds. And the little boy says, but I can feel the tug on the string. And the story that this reminded me of, there's a man, and he wanted a car, and they said, why don't you get this red Cadillac? It'd be really good for you. And he goes, oh, no, I can't afford it. I'm going to settle for this blue Ford. And he dies, and he goes up to heaven, and he goes through the gate, and there's this red Cadillac with his name on it. And he goes, what's this? And they said, we wanted you to have the best. We wanted you to have a really nice car, but you settled for something else. See, I don't want to settle for less than what God wants for me. They told me it's a whole pie. Alcoholics Anonymous, the steps, the traditions, the concepts, and everything is a whole pie. Do I want a bite of it? Do I want a slice, fat one or a skinny one, or the whole pie? I didn't take a sip of liquor, right? I didn't take a sip of wine. I'd finish the bottle and open another one. Put my effort into my recovery that I did in my drinking. I want the whole thing. There's a guy that I hear he's speaking again tomorrow, and he uses this prayer, and he said I could use it, and it's, God, if it be your will and you see fit, I would appreciate being a sober member of Alcoholics Anonymous another day. And it reminds me of what I need to do to be a sober member of Alcoholics Anonymous. And I love our way of life. I love this program and, sponsoring people. And, I'm so different now. I was a few years sober sponsoring somebody, and I was telling her what I was like when I was new to identify with her. And she goes, you were never like that. And I said, yeah, I was. And I took her to the group where I got sober, and there were people there that knew me. And I said, please tell her what I was like when I was new. And they did, and her jaw dropped. I feel like I should change my name because I'm not even close to who I was. But I like who you made me help get into being the person I am today. And I look, I want to read something. And this is the keys to the kingdom. It says, AA is not a plan for recovery that can be finished and done with. It is a way of life. And the challenge contained in its principles is great enough to keep any human being striving for as long as he lives. We cannot outgrow this plan. As arrested alcoholics, I like to read it out loud. I must have a program for living that allows for limitless expansion. Keeping one foot in front of the other is essential for maintaining my arrestment. Others may idle in a retrogressive groove without much danger, but retrogression can spell death for me. It isn't as rough as it sounds. As I become grateful for the necessity that makes me toe the line, I find that I am compensated for a consistent effort by the countless dividends I receive. A complete change takes place in my approach to life. Where I used to run from responsibility, I find myself accepting it with gratitude that I can successfully shoulder it. Instead of wanting to escape some perplexing problem, I experience the thrill of challenge and the opportunity it affords for another application of AA techniques, and I find myself tackling it with surprising vigor. There is now a sense of belonging, of being wanted and needed and loved. In return for a bottle and a hangover, I have been given the keys to the kingdom, and I don't throw them in the junk drawer. I love this program. It's given me a life beyond my imagination. There's so much I wish I could share with you, but I know I'm pretty much run out of time. And I am so grateful to be here, and thank you for letting me share.